next up is another huge success of a sharing economy. You all know, but I know as well, but I'd like to learn more about it. And we're so lucky to have Chad Dickerson, who is the CEO of Etsy, with us. Chad? Chad, Etsy is very well known. Yet,
yes.
there is so much we don't know about it. Are you?
Yes. Yeah.
What to make sure.
Okay.
So, tell me about just some history about Etsy, how it started,
Sure.
and where we are now.
So yeah, Etsy started in 2005 in Brooklyn, New York. I think the greatest city in the world, aside from London. Sorry.
You're based in New York.
We're based in New York. Yes, Brooklyn specifically. We don't even claim the rest of New York. only Brooklyn. But Rob Kalin started the company. Rob was a furniture maker. He didn't have a place to sell what he was making online, so he started Etsy, and that's how it all started.
And now, how big are you?
So the company, I joined the company in 2008, actually, as CTO in September 2008. The company was 35 people. Since then, we've grown a lot. We're about 400 people. We have offices in Brooklyn, of course, London, Paris, Melbourne, and we're just really a worldwide company now.
And what's the, so tell me some numbers. Maybe do you have
Sure.
some to show us, maybe?
Yes.
Those are sales.
So,
Wow.
So this is, starting out very small in 2005. Etsy's grown significantly last year around the world. $895 million sold on the platform in 200 countries, and last year we grew at about 70%, and we're continuing to grow at very similar rates going into this year. So this year on Etsy we'll significantly pass $1 billion in gross merchandise sales.
So this is all your sellers. And then what commission are you taking on this?
The business model is really simple, and I think that's one of the keys to Etsy's success. It's 3.5% when you sell an item. So the way we think about it is the maker makes 96.5%. And we charge 20 cents to list an item on the site.
That's not much.
US dollars. Yeah, very inexpensive.
Do you think you should have charged more now that you start like this?
We don't plan to raise the prices anytime soon. So we really believe that one of the keys to Etsy's success is having that really low barrier. So, we did a financing round last year, about a year ago. And one of the reasons, or one of the things that we talked a lot with investors about, they would ask the same question. And our answer was always, we believe that the low fee structure is part of what makes Etsy successful, and we want to bring more and more people onto the platform.
How much did you raise?
We raised $40 million.
On what valuation?
Good question. We don't answer that.
Well, thanks for sharing those numbers already.
The valuation was good.
I'm happy for you.
It was really good. Thank you.
Over $1 billion.
It was really good.
Well, given this, those numbers, so you're passing $1 billion in transactions basically on the site.
Yes, we're definitely on a run rate to pass $1 billion in transactions.
How would you define it? What's Etsy?
Really simply, Etsy is a marketplace for unique goods. We sell, obviously, handmade items. These are things, made by hand, made by people around the world, but also vintage. And our definition of vintage is anything 20 years old or older. So vintage clothing, vintage furniture, and also craft supplies. So craft supplies is a really huge business around the world, and we have a really vibrant business in supplies. So supplies is actually the #2 category on Etsy in Europe. So it's something that a lot of people don't think about as being sold on Etsy.
This is super impressive growth. Can you show us a few examples of what people sell or your resellers?
Sure.
Feel free to drive here, Chad. I see you have a lot of...
So this is James Ward. He sells these things like coffee mugs and plates with badgers and bears and things like that. James was kind of a victim of the down economy over the past couple of years. He started an Etsy shop in February 2010 and has done really, really well as one of the top sellers on Etsy. And James actually got a deal being an illustrator for Lacoste the clothing brand. So one of the things that we see on Etsy is that people start on Etsy and then they get discovered and they do all kinds of work that they never really dreamed of. So it's really a launching pad for further success.
And it's about the customers trying to be different, right? I was talking earlier about the consumerism versus the sharing economy. That there are new values. Like people want to have a different coffee mug or to have a different iPad or iPhone cover case that everybody has.
I think there's a lot of fatigue with the usual retail environment, kind of the cookie cutter, one size fits all. Everyone has the same kind of thing. And on Etsy, when you buy from people like James, you're literally getting something that's totally unique that no one else has. So I think it does speak to that desire to be unique and have something that other people don't have.
What are the most popular categories?
So the most popular category by far is jewelry, but also supplies, as I mentioned. Clothing is really big. Vintage, which includes furniture and all those types of things, furniture, clothing.
Do you go after them? How do you recruit them? Or they just show up on the site now?
One of the really wondrous things about Etsy is, as a business, is we've never really spent a lot of money on marketing. I mean, literally almost no money on marketing. So, sellers like James talk to each other and say, hey, you should sell on Etsy too. It's pretty much word of mouth, and Etsy has spread that way since the very beginning.
You don't buy advertising?
We do some small advertising buys, but it's not really a primary marketing strategy of ours. The community has a lot of goodwill because I think the pricing, for example, people feel like they're getting a fair deal on Etsy. So up until this point, our growth has largely been organic from people telling others to begin selling on Etsy.
How about international? We're in London. This is about 50 countries in the room and more online. So
Sure.
How is Etsy doing?
So Etsy's transactions last year happened in 200 countries. Of that 895 million, those were spread all over the world. Literally almost every country in the world. And about a third of transactions on Etsy cross an international border. And one of the really, really cool phenomenons of Etsy, I think it really fits into the sharing economy theme, is we have groups of self-organized sellers called Etsy teams. And we have teams in London, teams in Italy, like teams literally any place in the world that you go. And these are groups of sellers who gather together, trade tips, talk with each other. They have online message boards and that sort of thing. And one of the really amazing things that we've done with these Etsy teams around the world is translate our site into other languages. So we found out that the Etsy Italia team based in Rome had translated all of Etsy's English help material into Italian, and they had this elaborate series of Google Docs with all of the help docs in Italian. So we found out about that, and we actually built tools for them to translate Etsy into Italian, and now you can read Etsy in Italian.
And do you quality control it?
We do a little bit of quality control, but our sellers know the site so well and are so passionate about the site that the translations that they've done are really, really good and work really well. And we've done the same thing in Spain, Russian, Polish. We're really like...
So you have a team helping organize the crowdsourcing of the translation?
We do. So we're really... one of the taglines for Etsy is the marketplace we make together, and what that really means is we're literally making Etsy, the website, Etsy, the community, with the community, not just for the community.
Tell me about competition, Chad. You could have, those sellers could do that on eBay, right? If they wanted to. They could sell the same. They could build a shop or on Amazon. What is it? It's Amazon, it's eBay, Google?
I think something, well, theoretically, I think that way of looking at the world is all about kind of the capabilities. You can list items, you can sell them. Like, sure, you can do it on those sites, but I think the community on Etsy is really what people are there for. And sometimes I actually described Etsy as a community website where people happen to sell things. It's the community that means more than some of the competitors.
But everybody talks about it.
Yeah.
And you actually have probably one of the strongest community I have seen.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little about...
How do you do that?
I'll tell you about an anecdote that I thought was really, really amazing that really explains the power of the Etsy community. make sure that this is up.
It's up.
Okay. So last August, I was just literally walking down the street, and I got a tweet from Larry Morrissey, who's the mayor of Rockford, Illinois, which is a small town, not a really small, but small relative to New York, a city just outside of Chicago in the U.S. And Forbes magazine named Rockford, Illinois, the third most miserable city in the United States, which is not something that you would want. But anyway, Larry Morrissey, who I think is a very visionary mayor, tweeted to me, and you can see what he said here. He reached out to Etsy because he wanted our help to help build what he called an Etsy economy in Rockford, Illinois. And so an amazing thing happened. I mentioned Etsy teams. I mentioned the team in Italy who helped translate the website. Carrie McDonald, who's the head of the Rockford, Illinois Etsy team, tweeted back to both myself and the mayor and said, I want to help you do this. So last August, we started this conversation. We've been going back and forth to Rockford, and starting in the fall, there's going to be a curriculum on craft entrepreneurship taught in the local primary school and also in public housing for people who are low income. So when we talk about community, we mean the online community like everyone else talks about, but there's also literally all of these people on the ground who are parts of the Etsy community, literally working in their local communities, making the community better. And just last week, I visited Rockford, Illinois, and on the left, on your left is Carrie McDonald, who's the head of the Rockford, Illinois team. On my right is Larry Morrissey, the mayor, and beside him is Ron Kluwer, who's the head of the Housing Authority. So when we talk about community, we mean it in the way that people have talked about community for thousands of years. Yes. And so what we see happening in Rockford, these local economies connecting into this larger Etsy platform, we see happening all over the world in lots of different ways.
What's your advice for startups in the room or online watching this who want to be as successful as you with communities?
It's actually very difficult to describe. There's so much kind of magic involved.
But you fly.
Yes.
Joe was saying the same.
I would say that you have to approach it with a real sincerity. Like when you talk about co-creating a website or a community like we do with Etsy, you have to do it in a really sincere way. Like you can't, you don't build communities to exploit them. You build communities to be a part of them. And one of the things that I say to the company is that Etsy is not a company serving a community, although we do serve the community. Etsy is actually a company that is part of the community. And you have to think about yourself as being a member of the community, not just creating and tending to the community.
Keeping your business objectives at the same time.
Yes.
But as you said, you have very low commission, so you can't really be attacked on that, I guess, by your resellers.
I think one of the things you have to do is align your incentives with the sellers. And I think when we talk about pricing again, it's a very easy example. We've built an environment where our sellers feel very comfortable selling on Etsy. They feel like the price is fair. Etsy does really well, and they do really well. And I think if you create a community where, and this is true of Etsy, the whole basis of your company is the success of others, then that's what a true community is, helping other people be successful.
How do you help them go offline? Are you planning, are you planning Etsy shops one day, like a physical store?
So we did, I'll show you a photo here. In Soho, we did a Etsy holiday shop this year. So it was our first foray into retail.
That's your own?
This is our own.
So it
was a pop-up shop. But we've actually shifted our strategy a bit, and we talk about e-commerce a lot, and e-commerce is obviously growing, but e-commerce is still only a fraction of the larger retail world. So there are various estimates, but still about 90% of transactions happen offline. So in the past few weeks, we've launched a Etsy wholesale program. I'll show you a photo here.
By the way, while Chad is finding the photo, I will take a few questions from the room. So get ready if you have questions in a few minutes. There are there are hostesses to help us take your questions.
So when we think of the Etsy community, we think of this network. Rockford, Illinois, Rome, London, all over the world. And when we think about the best way for Etsy to become part of this larger offline retail ecosystem, we really believe that helping our sellers become successful in offline retail is a lot more important than running our own shop. So what you see on the screen here is one of our sellers who is selling in Nordstrom, which is widely considered the top retailer in the United States from a reputation standpoint. And so the way we think about it is if we help our sellers, like the seller you see here, sell into offline retail, we can do that in thousands of places as opposed to doing our own shop, which we can only do in a handful of places.
And there is no Etsy branding.
You can see the hang tags have Etsy branding on them.
Very small.
But again, I think when you ask the question about building a community, we know that our success is based on the success of our sellers, so it's more about the sellers than it is about us. One of the things I'm really excited about with the wholesale program, helping our sellers sell in offline retail, is that, in this case, Nordstrom, which you see here, they're actually buying locally produced merchandise for their local stores. So when you go to Nordstrom in the mall, and in this case it's in Chicago, and you see goods there, it's actually goods from the community being sold there. So when we imagine a world where Etsy sellers are selling locally produced merchandise into local retail, it really becomes an Etsy world in a retail sense. And again, 90% of retail happens offline.
And one of the key factors of success for Etsy is also that the end customers can kind of meet the sellers, right? They get to know them, which is a huge thing in this sharing economy. You want to know your farmer. You want to know where the tomatoes are being, grown.
Right.
I said
exactly.
made, grown.
Yes.
And so same on Etsy. You want to basically meet the person who made it.
Yes, absolutely.
That's very key, right?
And if you're a retailer like Nordstrom and some of the other retailers we're working with and small boutiques, there's no other place you can go to find all of this really unique merchandise and be able to bring the seller from a community into the store. So, Etsy's 8 years old now, and I think most people rightfully identify us as an online handmade marketplace, but we really see ourselves as reinventing the whole retail supply chain. So,
tell me about that.
Sure.
What is reinventing the retail? That's an interesting.
Yeah. So I mentioned that supplies is a really important part of the Etsy ecosystem. So in a very simple way, we're already supplying makers or other makers who make supplies are supplying makers with the goods that they need to make their creations. They're selling them directly online, and now with wholesale, they're selling them into offline retail. It's very early. So you can imagine a world where everywhere you go, whether you're buying the materials to make things, you're selling them online, or you're selling them in retail via Etsy wholesale, that the goods that you're buying or selling are from a local person. So when we talk about reinventing the whole supply chain, it's really reinventing or creating a whole people-powered economy where people are buying and selling directly to other people in their communities.
And you think local is very important?
Local is very important, and I think the really exciting thing to me about Etsy, one of the many things, is that the activity on Etsy represents a human activity that's almost as fundamental as language. And it's an activity that's been happening for literally thousands of years, commerce, the buying and selling of things. So Etsy allows you to do that locally, like what I described in wholesale, but also globally. So one of the things that we hear a lot from our sellers is how excited they are to sell things to people in other countries. Take Rockford, Illinois, for example. I've looked at the data from things that are being sold out of Rockford, and Rockford is a town that has had a lot of economic problems, the decline of manufacturing. There are literally people in Rockford making things and selling them to people in China. So this whole Etsy economy, I think, really challenges a lot of the notions of how the global economy can work.
And you agree with this change in values from consumerism, I buy the same crap as everybody else that advertising told me to buy, into I want to buy local, something unique that has been handcrafted?
Yes.
Do you think there is a change here, that it's just cooler to go on Etsy and find something different?
I think it's cooler, but I mean, another thing I wanted to point out is, really briefly, is I think
of course
there's people not only want to buy unique items, they also want to buy those types of items from companies and platforms that they believe in from a values perspective. So one of the things that we did at Etsy about a year ago now is we became a certified B Corp. And I could talk for hours about B Corps, but the basic idea of a B Corp, it's a new way of thinking about business in which you think of your business as a business that generates both profit and social good, and those things are harmoniously linked together. There are over 700 B Corps in the world. It's a movement.
But can you explain, so what's the difference? Because there are some people saying that the purpose of a business is to serve the interests of shareholders.
Right.
So you're saying, no, very social good.
Absolutely. So the B
like
Corp.
Tom Shoes, which I was talking about this morning.
Tom Shoes.
So you commit to doing good as well. So what is it?
So the way we think about it is, so a B Corp, and if you go to bcorporation.net, you can read all about it. The B Corp philosophy is that you can combine both of those things. And in Etsy's case, we are actually profitable because we create social good. Like there's no opposition. And the social good is that we help people in local communities make money. Again, right down to the business model, the 96.5% going back to the seller. So the whole B Corp idea is really challenging the concept of what business can be. And again, like we believe that we can deliver healthy returns to shareholders by being this kind of ethical business. To give you a clearer sense of what a B Corp is, it's essentially a third-party certification, a company named B Lab based in the US, and you get graded across the things that you see here.
So you get points.
Yes. So this third party did a deep dive into our business. We showed them our cap table. We talked about minority representation on our board. We talked about where our employees lived. Did they live in disadvantaged communities? We talked about employee benefits, and they graded us. The interesting thing is the minimum score is 80, and we got 80.2. So we have
congratulations.
We have a little ways to improve. But the really important thing is that I think people who are buying now not only want cool things, they also want a sense of the kinds of companies they're working with. And becoming a certified B Corp allows people who are working with Etsy to distinguish whether we're actually a good company versus purely marketing ourselves as a good company.
And there is environment in there as well.
Environment is in there as well, too. So we know now exactly how many gallons per flush of a toilet there are in Berlin, in the US, et cetera. So the US wastes more gallons per flush, by the way, if you didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
So we're, yes, we weigh our garbage. We've set environmental commitments for recycling and these sorts of things. And the point here is, again, as business today, if you're doing business with a company, you want to know what kind of company that is.
And people know that, and you think you get more business out of that, more recognition, more. You think it's a must for an entrepreneur? Like you could argue it's tough to spend time on this since the beginning when you're small, right?
I think it's. I mean, at Etsy, it's inherent to the business, so we don't.
Since the beginning.
Yes, I mean, we went through a process to become graded, but this is just the way we operate. And I think increasingly, as people out there who are buying and partnering with you want to know more about how your company operates, there are going to be more and more demands for transparency. And we felt like this third-party B Corp certification was the best way to do that. And it's a movement that's happening all over Europe. There are 3 B Corps in the UK. There are hundreds who've applied to become B Corps. So it's a growing movement.
Congratulations for doing that. Is there a question in the room for Chad? Yes. Can we have a microphone here? We need some light, I guess, as well, because we can't see. Here we go. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Jeremy Fremont, and I'm representing a little startup that I created last November, and it's called Sidekick Mark. And my friend Abby came to me for advice last month, who designs and creates customized jewelry out of cloth materials with this question. Should I attempt to really jumpstart my designer line using a platform such as Etsy, or turn to a potentially more customized solution such as Shopify to sell our goods? What advice would you provide to my friend Abby, and why?
Sure. So Etsy, of course. Etsy makes sense. But I'll tell you why. I think if you're just starting out, I mentioned James earlier, who kind of a victim of the tough economy, started his line on Etsy. One of the things that Etsy provides that other platforms don't provide, the sort of build your own website platforms, is traffic. So Etsy has 60 million visitors per month. If you build your own website, then you have to bring your own traffic to the website, market yourself, and that sort of thing. So I think starting on Etsy is a good way to jumpstart visibility. And again, it's only, to get started, it only costs you 20 cents to list your first item. So the cost and commitment is really low.
Yeah, that's amazing. Anyone else here?
Thank you.
It's coming. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Chris Tuttle, Soundview Technology Group. My question for you is, Etsy definitely has been successful, and it's got a certain vibe to it, you know, jewelry, a lot of handmade stuff. And in parallel with that, we've seen this huge rise in, you know, 3D printing and this whole O'Reilly sort of fomented make economy and maker fairs. And my question is that whole trend and that whole group of people, do you think that you're going to attract them to the Etsy platform? If so, do you have to change some things about how that kind of Etsy vibe is? Can you tell us how you plan to go after that?
That's a really great question. And you know, I mentioned earlier, Etsy's only 8 years old, but the changes in technology in the past 8 years have been really profound. There's 3D printing, but there are also CNC machines, you know, automated saws and routers and that sort of thing. And 8 years ago, some of those things cost $100,000, and now they're in the thousands. So that's really changed a lot. We're taking a closer look at that. I'll give you an example from the past that about technology that may illuminate the answer a little bit more. I've been doing research on this. In the late 1700s, when the first commercial sewing machine was invented by a French tailor, the shop where he had people working on these sewing machines was literally attacked and ransacked and torn apart because tailors said that sewing by hand was the only way to do it the right way, and that he was destroying jobs and that sort of thing. So I think when we look at Etsy, like, imagine if we took the sewing machines away from everyone on Etsy. Like, there would be riots if we did that. So when I think about things like 3D printing and some of these CNC routers and others, I really think that they're kind of the sewing machines of today. Like, they may not, in the present, look like what they produce may not look handmade or handmade under the Etsy definition, but because the technology is marching so quickly, we really have to look at those and consider whether or not those types of things should be sold on Etsy. And those things are, those types of technology are already participating. I mean, people are using parts from 3D printers on Etsy right now. So we're figuring that out.
Another one here.
Hey, my name is Rosie. I'm a co-founder of a startup called Farm Hopping, and it's basically a mix between Etsy and Facebook for sustainable farms.
Where are you based?
Sorry, in Bulgaria. We are located in Bulgaria.
Thanks for coming all the way from Bulgaria.
Thanks for having me. Anyways, I was wondering, how did you manage to create that global marketplace? Like, I mean, we have farms in India and we have a few farms in the States, but it seems a big challenge to actually create communities around those locations. And I was wondering, how did you manage to do that?
Yeah, I think to the point of what we were talking about earlier, I think you have to start locally. And you know, Rob and the founding team at Etsy noticed in 2005 in Brooklyn that there were craft fairs all over the city, and literally went to craft fairs and handed out flyers saying you can sell things on Etsy. And when Etsy launched in July of 2005, the first international transaction happened within the first 5 days that the site was open. So I think you start locally by sort of getting the supply side and the sellers kind of online, and you have to promote your site. But in a global marketplace, transactions can happen somewhat organically. So I think getting the passionate sellers on board is the most important thing.
Chad, this is really fascinating. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I cannot take any more questions. But
Thank you.
I have a last one for you, though.
Sure.
Because we started with New York.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting dynamic, of course, between, if you look at Europe, London, Berlin, Paris, and
Yes.
in the US, I would say New York, San Francisco, of course.
Right.
So if you focus on the US, just like how you seem to be Etsy is a New York company, and,
Yes.
and there's a few of them, right? There's Foursquare,
Tumblr. Yeah, it's a very healthy ecosystem.
So there is a scene. So what's special about New York? What's happening there?
So yeah, and by the way, I'll answer this having spent 10 years in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, San Francisco.
Well, so you know even more
So I have the point of comparison. I think New York is a city that I think is very much like the internet itself. It's very international. It's on 24/7. There's a lot of energy. I actually find New York a lot more exciting and vibrant than the Valley. I really enjoyed working in the Valley, but you know, working in Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, like if you want to take your team out to dinner after 9 o'clock, you're screwed.
Oh, after 8 o'clock, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, in New York, I think you can go to Denny's, I think, in Palo Alto at midnight. But
well, in San Francisco, there are very few places open
and
at
San
midnight.
Francisco is the same. So I think, and there's also, one of the things I really love about New York is, because New York is not considered the #1 market, there's a real hunger and a desire to prove oneself in New York, combined with all the greatnesses that is in New York.
And there is a VC scene with, you know, Fred Wilson. And
yeah, the VC scene is really developing.
Boston, a lot of people in Boston as well. So
yeah, and so I think that the things that are missing in New York are but developing are the sort of established universities. In the Valley, you have Berkeley, Stanford, and also the venture community is still developing, but is becoming very strong. Recently, Cornell announced that they were establishing a tech campus in New York. So I think the elements that you see in the Valley that aren't present in New York are developing really, really quickly. So 5 years ago when I came to New York, it was actually very quiet. There weren't really meetups every night and that sort of thing. And now in New York, it feels very much like it did in the Valley.
Yeah, and you can see what happens here in London as well. So it looks to me that there is definitely a movement that Silicon Valley still matters a lot, but less.
Absolutely.
It's decentralizing a lot, right?
Yes. And it's just easier to get around New York. Yeah. Like if you need to have a meeting, I don't know how many of you spent time in the Valley, but if you're in San Francisco and you need to meet with someone in Mountain View, it's like half your afternoon just getting there.
Yeah.
And New York is just everybody's there together. Yeah.
That's what my friends who live there say. That's what they say, yeah, that you can just go in 10, 15, 20 minutes anywhere.
And everyone helps each other. It's competitive in a certain way, but because the community is very small in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of energy and desire to prove like everyone is helping each other.
Chad, this is very fascinating, very impressive also, success.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I would urge everyone to check out the B Corp movement about how you can combine a for-profit business with generating social good. I think it's one of the most fascinating developments in business in the past 100 years, and something we're going to be talking about a lot in the next 50 years.
And you've shown it. You read at Chad Dickerson on Twitter.
Yes.
And you read it and you reply, and you'll be around as well.
I'll be around.
And I know you don't talk to many places, so thanks again for coming all the way to many conferences. I mean, you know, you're like pretty exclusive on where you go. So thanks so much for choosing London and choosing LeWeb.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.